The data hygiene problem as a whole, it really is, the discipline of keeping your records accurate, complete, current, up to date.
If your data is not up to date and not relevant and not trustworthy, this is really changing your impact for the individuals and for the communities and for the missions that you're serving.
Staff turnover. So that is a big thing that happens, especially in the nonprofit space. So this is a really real and prevalent issue, and it's someone that has this institutional knowledge.
Donor retention rate. So year over year, how often are people coming back to you, recurring donations, not just one-time givers? So they liked the mission and they came back again. So those are the people we want to hold on to.
You're listening to The Nonprofit Boost, where double the donation and industry leaders share practical tips to help you grow revenue and boost corporate fundraising at your nonprofit. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Nonprofit Boost podcast. I'm your host, Immaculate. Today, we're going to be talking about something we've probably all been hearing everyone saying. We need to diversify our revenue. And you know what? You have the passion, you have the vision, you have the database full of information. But as you go to pull up that information and see who might be able to transform from a one-time volunteer to a major corporate donor or a matching gift donor to a reoccurring donor, you sometimes maybe feel a little stuck, stalled, and that's not your fault at all. Sometimes it's because the data is outdated, there's missing information, or just data wasn't collected in the first place. And this is the data dilemma. And today we're joined by two experts from Omatic to help us close the gap in data literacy and clean up our act. We'll be talking about why revenue means more than just cash, the hygiene problem holding back your fundraising, and how to turn raw numbers into data stories that actually move donors to act. I'm thrilled to welcome our two speakers today, our two guests to the podcast. First is Carlie Mason. Carlie is a director of demand generation at Omatic. She's a fixture on data webinars and has the overall marketing take on data stories. Carlie, welcome to the show.
Hi, Immaculate. I'm so happy to be here.
Yay, excited to have you here as well. And joining her is Christina Hoffecker, engagement manager at Omatic, who works with customers every day. So she's the one that sees what's actually happening on the ground. Christina, super excited to have you here.
So glad to be here.
Yay. Thank you so much, guys, for taking time out of your day. Well, to just jump into the conversation today, when you're looking at the sector at large, in what ways are nonprofits challenged regarding the quality and understanding of their data? Anyone want to take it away?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take this one. So like you said, I work with the customers day in and day out, and we're seeing data coming from so many different systems, different platforms, different spreadsheets. We're seeing it all over the place, and that really makes for inconsistent data entry. So a big part of that is making sure that we're able to systemize and standardize that data as it's coming in. In addition to that, we have a lot of donor-led data and a lot of corporate-led data, and that is its own level of, how somebody might put everything in all caps, or something might have, different initials between different names. And that makes it so that systems read this differently. We're telling software how to identify records. And so that's one of those things that we have to come in and make sure, or any organization has to come in and have some sort of standardization with their data.
And just to build on what Christina said, this challenge is only getting bigger. It's not getting smaller. Stacks are growing, especially in this conversation about, diversifying your revenue streams. People are adding, they're not shrinking their technology stack. We actually recently launched one of our trends reports for the year, and I found that 80% of nonprofits have 4 or more technology solutions. And, more often than not, and Christina kind of alluded to this, but none of them are talking to each other, or maybe you have 1 or 2 that are talking to each other. So really everything ends up getting siloed, usually by department. So, development sees one thing, finance sees another department sees another thing. So you really just have this fragmented view of your data, and you're making decisions off of bits and pieces rather than looking at the full picture. Another interesting point to just think about when we talk about data quality is staff turnover. So that is a big thing that happens, especially in the nonprofit space. Development individuals are typically turning over, kind of the average is 18 months, maybe 2 years. So this is a really real and prevalent issue, and it's someone that has this institutional knowledge. They know things about your donors. They know exactly where they've stored those data points. And especially when you think about things like corporate relationships, major donor portfolios, it makes that handoff process really, really challenging when you have no context into that relationship because that data just isn't living anywhere. So this is really where good data and really consistent, up-to-date data can really help smooth transitions when there's staff turnover.
Thank you so much for sharing that and really setting the stage for us to understand what's happening on the scenes. You guys both shared a little bit, about revenue, and there's conversations. Everyone wants cash, but as we learned previously, and a lot of my conversations as well, volunteering and in-kind support is really growing in this space. A recent volunteer coordinator who participated in a survey of ours had shared how they noticed companies are moving away from only straightforward checks to maybe more in-kind gifts or grants, volunteer time off benefits. And so I was just curious, either one can share. Why is it so hard for nonprofit organizations, track these non-cash forms of support accurately?
So if you imagine the hierarchy of data and what is most important for your donors and your fundraisers, it's actual gifts. So it's money coming in the door. After that, that's prioritized. And after that, you start having your in-kind donation, your volunteer time. And I think historically it hasn't been prioritized, but exactly to your point, that is actually translating into major corporate sponsorships, corporate relationships. Volunteer time is part of employee benefits. We're getting into HR now. It's a whole different ecosystem that we didn't have in yesteryears, and now we're really moving into that. So, if you're not actually accurately tracking that, you're losing out on who your major volunteer groups are, who are the people in those, and you're also missing out on possible cultivation of new donors, because you might have the organization as a donor, but you might not have the 15 volunteers that showed up for the Saturday event or for doing yard work for a shelter or something like that. You don't have that information, and so you're really missing out on this big group of data, group of individuals that could be then cultivated further.
Well, thank you so much, Christina, for sharing that. And I just want to kind of bring it back to what you said about, I think someone mentioned, Carlie or Christina, you guys mentioned it's really important to have that your tech stack is talking to each other, to bring to your point, Christina, because if they don't, you really have a hard time finding those connections, seeing that stewardship point where you can be like, oh, we can elevate the supporter to newer heights, to a major donor, to maybe being an advocate at a company that you've been trying to maybe work with, sponsor with, partner with in your organization. Another point we really like to bring too, while it's really important for your tech stack to communicate, it's been reiterated multiple times, it's really important to also collect that data point, because if you don't in the first place, there's nothing for you to even connect the dots. So I really loved how you guys shared that information. Moving on to our next question, actually. We've been mentioning data hygiene, the hygiene problem multiple times now. Can you guys give us a definition of what that is, and how have you seen organizations miss out on these fundraising opportunities, or expound? Because Christina, you already shared a little bit of an example there. But I just wanted to hear what more things you guys have seen in the space regarding that.
Yeah, for sure. So to just give an overview of data hygiene, the data hygiene problem as a whole, it really is, the discipline of keeping your records accurate, complete, current, up to date, whatever synonym you want to use for that. And really what it comes down to is it can be the difference between having data that's actionable, trustworthy, you can make decisions on it, or data that's just kind of seen as clutter, where you can't actually use it, it's just there. So for nonprofits, a lot of times, it comes back to this unglamorous foundational work that you need to do to just make it so that your data is actually usable. Where the hygiene problem comes in is this is very challenging work to prioritize. If you think about all the different things that's happening in a nonprofit, if there's an upcoming gala, if you have some sort of grant deadline, the last thing people are going to be thinking about is we need our data to be clean. So it's just something that oftentimes just doesn't get prioritized, but it's also something that's cumulative. So, every week that you don't go back and clean up is another week that it gets stacked on top, and it compounds, and then the problem becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. So a lot of times, the organizations that we work with, we can see them have, 30 to 40% of their contact records, they essentially deem to be just unusable and untrustworthy, which is a huge portion. And one of the things that's particularly alarming about this is just the consequences of having that inaccurate, messy data, because it can stay invisible for a really long time. So there's very rarely this, aha, big moment where all of a sudden you realize that it's a bit of a crisis now. It's this kind of slow erosion of trust that happens over time. So, your team will slowly stop trusting your dashboards. You see spreadsheets slowly make their way back in. And eventually just your systems that you've kind of built, invested in to be this trusted source of truth becomes exactly not that. Another big part about, nonprofits in general is there's a layer of complexity that gets added into their data points as well, right? So, if you think about it in a for-profit world, it's typically a very like one-to-one relationship in a lot of organizations. But when you're at a nonprofit, you're not just tracking a single transaction that happened. It's a full relationship. It's the financial elements, volunteer hours, like we talked about earlier. So those time investments, there's family connections. So not only what am I as Carlie, an individual, doing, but what is my partner doing? If there's children that are also volunteering, like what does that look like? And so it just becomes this more complex, messy situation to try to work through as well.
You have your day-to-day and week-to-week and month-to-month consequences, but you also are getting into future funding. You're getting into your board's ability to tell your story, your ability to share your mission with the larger community. If your data is not up to date and not relevant and not trustworthy, this is really changing your impact for the individuals and for the communities and for the missions that you're serving. So there's so many downstream impacts of how clean data is so important for your organization.
Mm-hmm. No, Christina, I think you're so right on the trust element as well. In particular, you have your donors, your boards, the community at large, and all of them, their relationship with a nonprofit is based on trust. And trust can very quickly go when you're using inaccurate data. So a lot of the ways that, Christina and I will see this is, a donor shows up 3 different ways across 3 different systems. This can be, it comes down to what we call like the duplication issue. So, I can be under my maiden name in a volunteer program, and then I can be under, my married name in the CRM. And then when you go to add those together, it doesn't recognize it. So now I'm suddenly 2 different donors, 2 different stories. And this becomes a really big challenge. It can also show up, as your numbers not reconciling across your CRM and your financial systems. So there's just a bunch of different areas where, things can duplicate, things can just have some messy issues. And all of that ultimately leads to an erosion of trust if your numbers can't explain themselves.
We always say using like an impact report to share like what kind of impact we've had on the community. And I can just imagine if your data is not lining up, it's kind of hard to tell that story. And we actually will be jumping on a question like that later on this episode. But before we move there, we've talked about the challenges, the struggles now, and it's really painful to hear. But do you have any like actionable practices that nonprofits should start adopting to really start prioritizing their data hygiene?
Our customers really make these changes and make these plans in real time. So if you imagine your whole database is this massive store of really important, really impactful data. If you're trying to figure out how to clean it, you're going to have to isolate certain areas that you find most important. So small chunks of data every single week. Like Carlie said, this is a weekly, daily thing. You're going to have to continually isolate and keep on top of it. And then you have to have a culture of data hygiene. So it's not just you. There's not just one person that does this. It's across the board, top to bottom. Anybody who could be interacting with your donor, your mission, your CRM, everyone is responsible for data hygiene and really, start small, weekly tasks, projects, and then a culture of data hygiene.
The one thing that me and Christina really talked about, kind of prepping for this as well, is just the importance of establishing like data entry standards as well. So, pick one authoritative format for what do you want names to look like, addresses to look like, is it California? Is it CA? That becomes 2 different things as you're kind of crossing different systems. Just document it, training the entire team on it, and really making sure that you're enforcing it. Consistency is so much cheaper if you can get it right before having to go clean it back up. So the more you can get into the practice of doing that over time, you'll see that kind of benefit. this is something, you can do manually. Again, with like standard practices, but the more that you can automate, get it happening automatically, the better off that you'll be as well. So that's something that, like Omatic helps a ton with. There's other systems as well, but just how do you get it to be something that just happens smoothly? People do think about adding it into the system, but may not necessarily have to, bring up the standard guide every time. And if there are those kind of accidents that happen, that you have that system in place that will just make sure that it gets into the right format as it moves into your CRM or whatever you want your single source of truth to be. And then kind of my last point on that as well will be on the integration front, because I know, as a big part of this, we're talking about connecting systems, making sure your data is consistent across systems. But there are a lot of integration options that are out there. So that's something that you do also want to take in consideration is, frequently what we'll see with out of the box integration solutions where we'll call it like the point to point, where it'll go from point A to point B. A lot of the times it will kind of make you conform to the integration. So it might have you adding new fields or saying, hey, this field needs to go directly to this field. But if that isn't up to your standards, then that's something you'll want to explore. Like, hey, are there solutions out there that can make it so that I can have this work exactly how I want it to, exactly how it works with my existing systems? And then that's just going to make the adoption of those platforms so much easier, smoother, if you can take that approach as well.
Well, yeah, especially the one where you mentioned about like standardization. That's something we also share over here. We like stress using things like autocomplete tools just for when example, someone's on a form, that's when they're most engaged. So it's just really easy if someone can just have a set standard form and they don't even realize that they're being given these standard formats. But at the end of the day, they're giving you the information and they're giving it to you in a standardized way that's easy for your system to read. And so that's really great on both ends because you get the information and you get it really clean. So I really love that point that you made there. Moving on to our question about those stories, those impact stories that we shared. Once that data is clean, yay. Now we have to tell a story with it, of course. What are the 3 most valuable data points nonprofits should be looking at so they can interpret those datas into stories that, influence their supporters, really move the needle for these nonprofits?
Everyone's mission is different. Everyone's trying to achieve something differently. So this will, across the board be a little bit different of what you're trying to explain for your community. But generally, the most important things that we thought we would think that people would want to share would be both, first, your donor retention rate. So year over year, how often are people coming back to you and re-donating and being, recurring donations, not just one-time givers. So they liked the mission and they came back again. So those are the people we want to hold on to. Also, cost or dollar raised per channel. So if you have certain campaigns that were really impactful, like people loved the Mission Impossible Gala, and they really loved dressing up and getting ready for their event in this black tie event. So that was something that raised a lot of money. We should do something like that again next year. So this is a really great way of thanks for supporting us. We were so successful because of your impact. And that could then go into join us next year, come back next year, be a part of the event of the season. It also gives you more information on how you could be more impactful as an organization. These are the right tools that we use. These are the right strategies we had, or these were the lessons learned that we shouldn't do for future events or email campaigns or volunteer events, whatever. Apply that across the board. Third one, and this is where it varies, but it's program outcome per dollar raised. So we were able, if you imagine that from a shelter perspective with animals, we were able to support this many animals with this much money, and it cost this much per animal to keep them at the shelter and under your care. So it gives you actionable amounts that you can say, sponsor an animal for a month, or house this animal for the next so much time, or here's the adoption fee. This is what it costs to take care of the animal. And so you give donors opportunities to then say, sponsor us at this level, or this level, or this level. And that way they can then see themselves having an impact, making change, and really being a part of the mission.
Yeah, I think a big component of this is just having those numbers that help you anchor the stories that you're telling, whether that's to donors or to the board. I also think they're really great for, when you want to try new things. Like Christina kind of said, it really helps highlight what's working, what's not working. So in the case of, your donor retention rate. Maybe you are seeing, hey, our number of recurring donors isn't as high as we want to see it. So what are some interesting new things that we can try to get those one-time donors coming back? Do we need to educate them more? How to, again, bring those numbers into those conversations that we're having with those single-time donors? But I think it opens up this opportunity for, more creative thinking as well when you're anchored in these numbers that are showing the actual impact that you're having.
I love that so much, y'all. Yeah, I think we see that quite often here at Double the Donation. I know someone just shared how they were able to create like the story because they had the information about this one donor, and they started off maybe like they were studying like a volunteer, just very quiet, did their work, and then eventually they were able to elevate them to become a major donor. And the volunteer was the one that took the initiative for that. But then because they were able to track like the history of where that donor was and how like they interacted with the organization, they were able to create a story where people can see themselves in that donor. They're like, oh yeah, I'm a volunteer. And then they're like, oh, I've been volunteering X amount of times as well. Maybe I could start elevating or like start getting more involved with this organization a bit more differently. And so another way, like another example, how about data can really help with that if you have the complete information, donor history about your supporters. But that's just one story. I was just interested to hear if you guys had any, stories on your end where they were able to create that compelling story as well.
Prior to working for Omatic, I spent time in the nonprofit world, and I worked for a national mentoring organization. And one of our primary campaigns was leading the impact of cost per relationship. So because we were able to understand the cost of our budget, how many organizations we had, or how many relationships we had, and we also were able to take those numbers and apply it against corporations. So we were able to have corporate partnerships of saying, a major donor was sponsoring 5 matches or 5 relationships, and this is the impact of that organization. And it allowed people to say, I'm responsible for these, for funding these relationships, and I have a part in making a difference in these lives. And that is not possible unless you have the right information. And it's also not possible unless you have a team that is dedicated to clean data and ongoing data maintenance. So you can have these big, impactful campaigns and funding opportunities, which ultimately lead to impacting more people. So data helps you enhance and grow your mission. It couldn't be more clear that it's, the absolute most important thing you could do for your CRM.
Thank you so much for sharing that, y'all. Well, we are at our last question, our little wrap up here. We love leaving our listeners with some actionable advice. So just to wrap it up really nicely, do you guys have any steps that nonprofits can be taking right now to really clean and prepare their data in the next 30 days, in the next evolution of fundraising?
One really quick, or not quick, but really important step is to start with an honest audit. So understanding where you are right now, good or bad, understanding what your data looks like and where you want to go from there. If you know, what do you know about your donors? What do you know about your information? Is it accurate? What level of that? Having those conversations internally is a really important thing. And then you can at least get a ground level of what needs to change. And then after that, integrate where you can. I know we've talked a lot about integrations, but that takes the guesswork out of what you're doing, and it takes the manual work out of your day-to-day tasks. So you can focus on more important things. If AI-powered tools are part of it, that's even better. The data is only as good as you have it. So if you have any kind of inconsistent or fragmented data, that'll lead to bad outputs. So we really, integrate where you can and start with an honest audit.
When you're thinking about things like an audit or an integration strategy, it can be really overwhelming. So really what you want to think about is, what do I need to kind of get that unified donor view? So how can I make sure every volunteer record, every gift, everything that this person, or every way that this person has interacted with my nonprofit into a single spot, so that I can make really smart, educated decisions based off of a full picture, not those bits and pieces when it's fragmented across different systems. And it's also just important to think through, it's a mindset shift, both for you as an individual, but also trying to get your organization as a whole on board with this mindset shift that data hygiene, if you do go pursue this kind of 30-day plan, it's not a one and done, great job, we have all our data clean. It is something that is an ongoing effort that you need to be making. So again, making sure that you have these standardized practices, that your team is trained on them, that you're integrating where you can. And then that way, when you're looking back 5 years down the line, you still have a nice, clean, usable system. And the nonprofits that do prioritize this, I think we'll have a really big competitive advantage. Again, especially as we go into what Christina kind of talked about with like AI is a huge thing that's on the horizon for a lot of nonprofits. We want to say off the top of my head, about 42% of people in our survey had shared that AI is a big priority for 2026. So it is super top of mind, but this concept of garbage in, garbage out, if you don't have a nice clean data set, all it's going to do is scale the issue, not resolve it. So really everything comes down to this data hygiene and making sure that you prioritize it as an organization.
Yay, thank you so much for sharing those points, y'all. Really made it a little bit less daunting to step into that concept, into that topic, and how to start it, maybe through small steps. So thank you again so much for sharing y'all's insights. If ever our listeners have any lingering questions, want to reach out to y'all for more information, what's the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, I'm always happy to have anyone who wants to connect on LinkedIn. I am active on there. So I want to say my URL is Carlie Mason, but if not, just find Carlie Mason at Omatic. That is me. Otherwise, besides that, we also have our email integrate at omaticsoftware.com. So if you're looking to more have kind of like sales conversations, wondering how you can integrate your platforms today, that is another great way to get a hold of us.
Same as Carlie, can LinkedIn connect with me or chat over our primary platform.
Yay, and thank you to everyone who tuned into our podcast episode today. Don't forget to like and subscribe to be notified about new episodes. Bye, have a good one. Here's your next steps. Visit doublethedonation.com to explore the tools and strategies that schools and nonprofits use to unlock more revenue through corporate fundraising. And if you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe and share the video with your team and peers.